what is your take about China non-opposition to the invasion of a sovereign country?
So China is saying, look, if you want peace, you can't just look at a snapshot. You've got to look at the entire video. Then when you look at the entire video, you'll find a way to the future. People get enraged when they don't understand the other side. Then you can kill. But when you realize that the other side has the same hopes and fears as you have, with family and children to worry about, then it will cause you to pause.
喺睇片之前，大家記得分享、讚好同訂閱灼見名家，最緊要撳埋呢個鐘仔，咁你就唔會錯過我哋嘅最新影片。
You know, in the Western media, the prevalent view is China managed COVID terribly. There was confusion, there was overreaction, people oppressed, and so on. In fact, China did extremely well. While the rest of the world was paralyzed, the Chinese economy continued to function. According to the WHO, per million, China had one of the fewest deaths in the world. For most of the world, we were at home, working or pretending to work, and looking forward to the parcels that came through our doors, and opening the boxes, and sometimes forgetting what we had ordered a few days ago. But usually with delight to find that, well, these are things we wanted. Well, who made the stuff in the boxes? They're all made in China. And that was at the heart of the supply chain crisis. China was producing for the entire world during that period. And all the ships were pulled to Chinese ports. I was in logistics. And the freight rates rose steadily from 1,000 to West Coast US to Europe, 1,500, 2,000. And the ships were told, do not take on cargo. The moment you unload the containers, come back. Then when rates reached $5,000, they were told, leave the boxes there, because the cost of a box is only $2,000. The critical deficiency were ships. And of course, in other parts of the world, rates went up because the ships were no longer there. In 2002, when Omicron appeared, the Chinese were not sure what it meant, because in Hong Kong there were many deaths. It turned out later that the deaths were mostly due to Delta, not Omicron. Then the 20th Party Congress was coming up. And the 20th Party Congress in the Chinese Communist Party is as important as a paper conclave. So they had to, for their own legitimacy, make sure that when the votes were counted, the hall was full. They were able to contain Omicron in Guangzhou, Shenzhen, but in Shanghai, because the Shanghainese thought they were superior and had better methods, it got out of control. The vice premier went down, Sun Chunlan, and told the party secretary, who is now the premier of China, he said, you stop it. The Shanghainese were traumatized. For 2-3 months, they were in jail, regardless of what they were doing. You know, my Chinese friends outside Shanghai laugh at the Shanghainese. They said they had a comeuppance because they've always had a superior attitude towards Chinese from other parts of China. But just to give you a sense of how much China moved ahead, in 2021, China's merchandise trade surplus was $520 billion. In 2021, it went up to $670 billion. In 2022, when the rest of us thought that China was in turmoil, the merchandise trade surplus went up to $870 billion. Now, in Europe, America, Japan, the printing presses were working 24/7 to provide the money supply which kept us all fed. And life was normal apart from physical deprivation of movement. But the guy beavering away at the corner, he was collecting all that money. And that's why Chinese money is now flowing out to buy assets in the world.
Different states can have different kind of idea about a just world order. And what can be seen as something just can also be seen as something imperialist or expansionist. So about trust, what are the concrete steps that we can envision to build trust between Europe and China?
It begins by being interested in the other, which means respecting the other. And once you do that, you begin to see the good on the other side. And then it's more difficult for you to be angry with the other party. People get enraged when they don't understand the other side. Then you can kill. But when you realize that the other side has the same hopes and fears as you have, with family and children to worry about, then it will cause you to pause. And perchance to say, oh, maybe we can explain why they are behaving that way. Well, China has taken a dangerous but very interesting step to make proposals for peace in Ukraine. The peace proposal is just a statement of principles. So it's not likely to get anywhere for the time being. But at some point in time, the various parties will be exhausted. Right now, they're still giving war a chance. At some point in time, they have to give peace a chance. And there will have to be a ceasefire. I don't think there'll be a peace agreement for a long time. There'll be some kind of a partition, which is the reason why Henry Kissinger hinted at it when he said that Ukraine should join NATO, not only to protect Ukraine, but to protect NATO from Ukraine, which means almost a colonization of Ukraine to maintain the peace. Now, the Chinese envoy said, because mathematically there's no solution, they said, we can't talk peace unless the parties in their hearts open up a little space for the other. In other words, it's not just the work of diplomats. It is in the propaganda when we get people to hate the other. That are you prepared to loosen up and say, look, see possible good in the other? Then the process of negotiation can begin. But it will not begin until both sides are exhausted by war.
I just wanted to ask you, we speculated a lot about what the world with a more dominant role for China would be in the future. And you mentioned briefly the war in Ukraine. I was about to ask you, what is your take about China non-opposition to the invasion of a sovereign country? So, if you think about the perspective a European has, we have seen similar situation like the Russian invasion of China in the 30s, in the 40s. This resonates very deeply with us, what has happened between Ukraine and Russia. So I was wondering, what is the way in which China is seeing this conflict in a way that does not bring it to openly condemn the invasion of a sovereign country as neighbor?
From a geopolitical viewpoint, China wants Russia to be a separate pole, to stand up to the US. So if there's regime change in Russia, and Russia becomes a part of a Western alliance, then China will come under much greater pressure. So from that higher perspective, China would not want Russia to fail. So economically, China will support Russia. But militarily, Ukraine is a distant war for them, over which they don't think they have complete understanding, and about which they don't think they should get too involved, except as a peacemaker if there's room for a peacemaker. That's what they do. They don't support invasion. They've said that in their first principle. But at the same time, they say there's a history to it. which was NATO's relentless expansion to the east, which the Chinese have always opposed because it bifurcates the world and it is divisive and aggressive. So China is saying, look, if you want peace, you can't just look at a snapshot. You've got to look at the entire video. Then when you look at the entire video, you'll find a way to the future. But if you just look at a snapshot, you won't find a way to the future.
So my question is about, from the Chinese perspective, about the Europe's in China's future. So as the EU is adjusting the Chinese strategy and proposing the de-risking strategy rather than the decoupling that the US one, and the EU is trying to make this risking to the G7 level, to more like a circle surrounding China. So what do you think from the Chinese perspective? It is a kind of opportunity or challenge, and what kind of reactions may occur from the Chinese side to this risking strategy? Thanks.
Many years ago, I was a visiting scholar in Peking University, and when I was there, I was invited by the China's National Defense University, Guofangda, to give a speech about US-China relations from a Singapore perspective. One question was about the deployment of 2,000 Marines, US Marines in Darwin. So I told the Chinese, you must expect that at the bedrock, the relationship between Australia and the US is a profound one. You need only visit the War Museum in Canberra to know that it is a relationship watered in blood. In the same way, I think China should know that the relationship between Europe and America is a profound one, particularly white America. But America's demographics are changing. And more Americans do not resonate as much when they see the Parthenon or when they visit Florence, because they have a different history. So American politics will change. But this common basis, that what created America was as a daughter civilization of Europe, that is very deep. So China should have no unrealistic expectation that it can ever divide America from Europe. But it can tell Europe, look, we have different interests, let's work on all your interests, those which are allied to America and those which are more important for yourself. Take a practical approach and be patient. So I see China as wanting a strong EU. They will support EU autonomy, even in defense, but they know that will take a very long time. And they support a strong euro because they resent the exorbitant privilege which the US dollar enjoys today, which enables the US to have 800 military bases around the world. The China today is not the China of 100 years ago. 8-country alliance in 1898. All Chinese people remember that, how they ravaged China and took away artifacts which are still in Western museums. The big question in the world today is a Titanic contest between the US and China. The US is a relatively young country. The Chinese think that it's almost infantile because it's only 300 years. It's about the length of one dynasty. But still, it is big, it is powerful, it is almost frightening. The problem is this. The US believes that China will behave like an imperial power when it becomes big or bigger. The Americans, from helping China rise again, now fear China's rise, is to be expected.
中意名家分析，記得俾 like 同埋分享，支持同訂閱卓見名家，最緊要撳埋呢個鐘仔，咁就唔會錯過我哋嘅新片。